This is Russ Andersson. This tutorial today is really just a preliminary for another tutorial. And here I'm going to show a little modeling work based on a survey shot of this little spring house here. So the task is just to come up with a 3D model for it that's approximate, that's going to be used for the coordinate system setup in a different shot. So as I mentioned, this was a survey shot. It's just a bunch of still frames with a camera, and it was set up using the add survey shot initially. So that part of it you can look at, of course, in the manual and some of the other material on survey shots. So I've already gone and done a bunch of surveyed trackers, and I'm just going to do maybe 2 more here just so you can see what that's about and what the setup is. So the idea for survey shots is we're going to turn on the lock C drop, and that way I'm just going to go to where I want to start creating a tracker, and instead of using the create over there, I'm just going to hold down the C key and push the button and drop a tracker there. And now as I work through the shot, I'm just using the comma and period keys. I can just go and click anywhere in the shot to track my feature, even if it jumps around due to the shots not being particularly well aligned. It's easy just to go and quickly smack the mouse down in the right spot and keep moving through pretty quickly. So this is just a pretty efficient workflow for making your way through a bunch of shots. Here I've got like 17 frames, so it's not super exciting to watch at this stage, but you can see that you can go and do this. So I'm just going to finish up doing this one. Okay, so we've got our way through the shot. Now I'm just going to go through and look at the little mini tracker view up here and keep the mouse in there. And I can just go and tweak those things a little bit to make them line up as well as I want. And you can do this sort of as accurately as you want and to spend the time to do. But it's a good idea to take at least one pass through just to refine it a little bit. So now I'm just using again the comma and period to scrub through the shot. Of course, now at the end I'm just going to hit the plus key on the numbers pad to lock that up. So now we'll just go back to the beginning of the shot, and we're going to repeat this process again. Again, I'm going to hold down the C. And one of the things you should notice about this is that I'm doing it on the front edge of this door frame, not on the back edge. You need to avoid problems. If I was going on the back edge too much, then as I work through the shot, I'd be tracking something that's actually not flush on the surface, but inside and at a different viewing point, it would really be looking at a different point in the 3D environment. And as a result, the tracking data would shift. There is not a single consistent point that you'd be tracking. So that would be bad. So I'm paying a little bit of attention just to, pick a point that is out there on the surface. You can see if I was back here, that's the problem, the spot that would be a problem that I'm talking about. So we'll just stay out on front. So you can see why I ran through the other points ahead of time to save us a little trouble. And now we've got our whole little sequence. And again, I'm just going to go through and tweak these a little bit. And I'm tweaking in the mouse. You can also use, again, the number keys, the arrows on the number pad, to do it without really using the mouse at all. That's a reasonable approach as well. I'll point out that the distance that those nudge keys on the number pad cause the cursor to move, or the tracker to move, can be adjusted from some of the preferences. So depending on the resolution of the shot and so on, you can adjust the preferences, and you can also use the shift or control to get a finer motion as well. So here I've gone through, I've done that. Again, we'll just lock it up there. So now we've got two trackers on the surface there. I'm going to turn off this lock Z-drop on so that it doesn't cause any other trouble. And now we're going to go to the solver and run an initial solve. And when you do that, you see there's a little bit of craziness involved in this. You know, what happens there? And if you think about this for a second, you'll notice that really these first couple of frames were looking almost dead on to that front planar surface, and there's no depth on that. And the rule is that if all the trackers are on the same plane, you can't get 3D. There's no 3D in the initial images at all. So those couple of frames are problematic. So actually what I had done previously is I actually had a couple more trackers so that they are off to the side here, so that even as we move through the initial positions, they continue to be visible. So if I resolve now using those, so that they didn't cause trouble, I had made them zero-weighted trackers. So let's go back there. We need to select them all and make them all not zero-weighted trackers. I was doing that so that they didn't affect the solve. So once again, for the money, now we've got what we want here. We've got a much smoother path. It looks like there's still a little bit of a hoppiness to it there. Hard to say exactly what that is. That as you can see, I tried to pick up a little more depth at this back corner of the building because we really don't have anything on there. So I have these trackers sitting out there. They may be making life a little more difficult, but it's also the case that this is a path using the advanced 2 steps and shoot approach. So there's no track here. This is just walking across a field. So it would be a mistake to assume that path should be perfectly smooth. Okay, so we've got our initial 3D solve for the corners of the building, and what we want to do next is pick up a coordinate system that's going to be useful. Now, the overall building, is not sitting on a flat piece of land. You see, this is actually much lower than the front part up here. So it's not worthwhile to talk about a ground plane on this. There's no ground plane. It's not a flat piece of ground. So what actually is useful to look at when you think about this is to use this roof line. Because if there's anything that's probably pretty flat and well rectified to the geometry of the building, that would be it. And those are parts that we can see. So we're going to set up the coordinate system using those particular points. So let's just switch back to that again. We're going to use the star 3 tool initially. We're going to select that point there, this one here, and the one in the back. And now we're going to get another solve to it. And now we have the building lined up with the coordinate axes. We'll see from the looks of it, these 2 points back here look like they're not exactly the world's most accurate things. So one detail to this that it would be nice to get right is the size of the building in some tractable units. And, from what I did earlier, you might think, oh, well, we've got maybe a measurement for this door. Let's use this width of the door to set the measurement of the whole thing. Well, what I'm going to tell you is that that is not the best idea. You always want to use as large of a distance as possible in the scene. If I use just the distance between these 2 points, basically it's going to get multiplied, by 4 or 5 to create an error in this direction. So if I'm off by a 1/4 inch, I'm going to be out by 1 inch or more out here. So instead, it's wiser to get a distance that's already the width of the building, for example. And that's the measurement that I have from the original site. So to do something with that, let's go to our coordinates panel again. And the current scaling is set basically by this particular tracker. It's labeled to be set up by that star 3 tool by default to be at 20 units along the x-axis, and the x-axis is running this way. So that's the measurement that I don't want to use. So I'm going to change that to be just on the x-axis somewhere. I'm going to use these 2 trackers here to set up the distance. So I'm going to select the one of them. I'm going to hold down Alt and click the other one. It's probably pretty hard to see, but there's a little gray line between the 2 of them now that represents the fact that this tracker 10 over here is now the target tracker for tracker 9. And I can set up a distance value that says what I want the distance between the 2 to be. And now I just hit Shift G again, resolve the scene, and now we've got a new version of the scene. And if I take those 2 points, you can look down at the bottom. You can see, as long as I don't move the mouse somewhere else, the distance between the 2 of them is 15 units as commanded. And we could see that from the coordinates panel also. Now, if you look in the top view, you see that something else silly happened. And this is a perfectly valid and normal thing to happen. It's basically we've told it that we want this one tracker to be on the x-axis, and it is, but it happens to be at an x of minus 15 instead of where we really like it to be of a plus 15. So what we can do about that is use these buttons up here, and we're just going to hit that once so that it shows x plus. We're saying that, hey, we want this guy to be a plus 15 instead. So now if I hit the solve again, it gets flipped back in the right direction. So that's just one of the little practical details. That the other solution was perfectly right also. It just happened to not be the one that we want. So a lot of times there's more than one possible solution, and those little buttons give you the way to control what it is you want and say what it is that you want. So we now have our basic coordinate system set up for this so that our coordinate axes are lined up with the sides of the building pretty nicely. So now we can actually start the modeling portion of this. And we're going to start out creating a box to be the bottom part of the building. So the first thing that we need to do is find the particular trackers, and they're going to be these 2 here for the bottom part of the building, and similarly there's one in the inside back here. The ones that are further out, are the ones that are the overhanging edge of the building. So we just identify which ones we've got. And you can see, by the way, here's that little gray line that I mentioned also, that's the distance constraint between the 2 trackers. So we're just going to start out and not obsess over the details. We're just going to sweep out a box that runs roughly through those trackers, and we're going to set a height that looks roughly about right. So, ta-da, we've got our basic box. It's up in the air. Why is that? Well, that's because we put the ground plane of the coordinate system up in the air. So we're going to go and start playing around with this all. So the first thing that we're going to do, let's switch to a quad perspective view. We're going to take the box and we'll rotate it. I'm just using a control click there. We're going to rotate it 180 degrees. So on the rotate tool here, let's just clean that up so we've got 180 degrees exactly. So now it's facing down instead of up, which just makes life easier to adjust. And let's go to the end of the shot. And now you see from the side view some more of the details of what we want to do. First, we're going to go and select the numbers tool there that allows us to adjust the degree of subdividing, if you like, of the box. So let's just jack that up a bit. So maybe around 15, 16, something like that. We get a nicely decimated side there that kind of matches the other one. So that seems more tractable. And now let's go to the scale tool. Now you notice our pivot point is up here at the top because we flipped it upside down, which is kind of handy because now we can just take the z coordinate value, the scaling value, and I just increase that, looking down here at the back coordinate there. So I'm adjusting it to get the size to match up roughly to the ground level of that tracker back there. So we know that the exact width of the house that we want to use is 15 units. So we can just plug that in directly. We can go to the front and double check on that. And we'll just go to the perspective view a bit larger. So I'm just going to shift that left and right a little bit to line it up to adjust with the front of the building a bit better. Now, we don't really necessarily have it adjusted right in all the different directions. Like we have the front to back to align also, and that's going to affect the position here. So basically we're switching back and forth to look at it from a couple of the different angles to get it to be right in basically all the different ways. One trick that I'll show too here, let's go, I'm just doing the orbit, and I'm just going to turn on the geometric hierarchy toolbar to show the edit pivots. So I can go and move the pivot there up to the front of the box, and that's useful. I actually had the front to back direction down pretty well. But this way, by moving the pivot to the front, now I can adjust the distance to the back without having it move the front position either. So the point of this is that by moving the pivot position around to different useful locations, you make it easier to adjust these things to line up properly. Now, one other thing, that I had mentioned is what happens with the back. And let's just look around here for a second. So the question is, what's the story in the back? And you'll see that there's a little bit of a deviation there on the outline of between the edge of the mesh and the edge of the building. Now, that might be a little bit of rotation. So I can actually go and just rotate the box a little bit. And here again, I'm rotating around that pivot. So, now if I go to the side view again, I might decide that really what I'm doing, oops, that's not what I wanted. I might adjust that, and let's see how I do there. So that looks like it was a good idea that, the front back alignment wasn't perfect. So just here, just adjusting that rotation a little bit is a good thing. So that looks like it's pretty well cleaned up this back. And there's a little bit still in this front corner. You can see there's a little bit of a deviation there, and it looks like maybe the wall isn't so flat. So the thing that we can do there is use the smudge tool. We use the smudge and the softly, and we're going to have the brush size pretty low. So we're just going to grab a particular vertex there, and let's make our range smaller a little bit. So I can just go and adjust the position of those vertices a little bit just to tighten the whole thing up. So I can do that, and I can go back and look at it from some of the other views and decide exactly what I'm looking at. And there's no rule that says that a building built in the 1800s is exactly square. So we can just go and tweak that up a little bit. So that's what the smudge tool is good for, to help you adjust your model to better match exactly what there is in the image, when you've got kind of the other things nailed down reasonably well. So that is our first portion. That's the bottom part. So now let's think about what we want to do about the roof. And here, we've got a triangular, prismatic roof. So the thing to do with that actually is to go and we're going to create a cylinder. Here's our cylinder. We'll give it some size, and we'll give it some depth as well. So let's start out. We're just going to spin it around. And the key point is here that we're going to use that numbers tool. Let's see, is that the one we want? No, that's the one we want. Let's get down there to 3. So now we've got, a 3-sided cylinder, which just happens to be what we want. And if you look at what we've got, there's the width, basically, of the, there's an adjustable width of the roof, and the other is adjusting the height. So it's the right sort of thing. We can, that's not the one. Let's see. Let's just do this. So now we've just flattened our roof out. And while we're at it, we've got our perspective view going in the bottom. So let's do the edit pivots thing again. I'll drop the pivot point down to the bottom. And I'll point out that there's a snap to to the pivot position that lets it get exactly to the edge of the bounding box of an object. But you do have to zoom in a little, so that it gets close enough to the edge that it'll snap onto it. So that's why I zoomed in there a bit. Let's turn the edit pivots back off. So now we can take our object, our roof, and plunk that on there. And at this point, let's start taking just the perspective view, and I think we need that for the moment. So we want to adjust the height of the thing to match up with the, actually I think we want to match it up with the top surface there. So let's see where to go. There we go. So we'll get that lined up. That was a middle scroll wheel there. And let's start adjusting the height of this thing. Nope, that's the width. So we'll do that. And here comes the peak of the roof coming down. And we need to get it a little bit wider. So that's a kind of low-tech way to do it. If I wanted, let's just see, if I select those two trackers, let's go to the camera view. Nope, how about top view? I'll get what I want sooner or later. There we go. Too many things selected. Okay, so it's 16.8 units across. So let's go back and set this up so that the width of the sky is the 16.8. It looks like, unfortunately that number is like is getting affected by the fact that we started out with a cylinder rather than a pyramid itself. So that unfortunately that approach isn't going to help. But if we were doing a box or something, then we could do the right thing and just measure it and then have it set up as the exact width. If you think really carefully, you'll probably figure out why that didn't work out. So there's our width. We've got our height, for that matter, that's set up pretty well also. So let's go just back to the end of the shot. And now we need to get the distance to the back right as well. And we still have a ways to go. Wrong one. Oh, that was the problem. That's what we want. That makes it much happier. Now, the other thing that we need to look at is whether we're aligned really with the right thing on the front, just because the front wall and the front corners of the roof aren't necessarily lined up quite the same way. The roof is a little bit further out, but it looks like that's pretty good. You can look in here, you see that the front of the mesh is lined up with the roof, and same thing in the back. It's pretty good. And you see that there's a bit of a misalignment here. So in this case, we might actually want to just do a smudge. We did look like it was pretty good on the front. Where here it's lined up there. We're lined up to that point up at the top nicely. In the back it's a bit off. So again, let's just do the all-purpose smudge approach. In this case, we're going to need to use a substantially larger value to pick up towards the front. And you can see the effect of that. We don't want it to go up to the roof. So let's make sure that we don't get to the roof line. I just was dialing down that range and taking a look up at the top corner and making sure that that didn't move. I can just go and pull some of these down. I think the problem there is that that roof is sagged a bit. So now we get a more refined version of that. We've still got a shadow being cast that's not really too helpful. Let's just point out we can make that not cast shadows. So that just makes it a little more visible. So our roof line is running along there. If we can make this a little more visible. Yeah, I think we actually we have maybe the wireframe being lit. There, that's better. So there we have, you can see how the roof line is, the mesh is following along the roof line there. Clearly it would have been better to have some more images off from that side of the model, from that side of the building, just so that we could get a more refined model. In this case, that was kind of a pretty full field over there. We need to do a little more work on this before we're done. First, we're going to take off the top of the box in there. So let's take the cylinder, we're going to hide it so that we have just the box exposed. Let's do it from about right here. We're going to select the box, we're going to set it as the edit mesh and set up the lasso vertices mode. Just come and select the entire top here. Now we're going to do a delete the selected facets. And if you look around, the other sides are there. We're just looking at the inside of them. And we're going to then delete the unused vertices. So we've got our little spring house here without the distraction of that top roof part. So now we're going to do our export using the meshes in scene as OBJ. Now we're going to go and we're going to import that back and go here to the perspective view. And you notice we've got the pivot point is up here in the middle just because of how we built the thing initially. So what we're going to do is go and just snap that onto that bottom ground plane. And let's also go and bring that into the center line, just for effect, really. So now we've got a better pivot point placement for our little spring house there. So this we can go and do an export, and instead of using that scene export, now we're just going to export it directly as in OBJ, and whatever, we can just export that now. So that's the preparation of the spring house model. So now hopefully you're ready to go take a look at how you can use that to align a tripod solve. Thanks for watching.